Hey friends, I am so excited to introduce you to one of my friends for this next edition of the Dirty F Word, Lessons We Learn from Our Failures. My friend Rich Homburg is the president and CEO of Detroit Public Television. He's had an amazing media career. He's just an amazing human being too. And I'm grateful for his time because when I first moved to Charlotte to lead PBS Charlotte, he was a guy I called and asked an awful lot of questions to when I was a brand new general manager. And so he's a good human being, and he's got a great dirty F word lesson on failure to share with us. And I'm just going to start, Rich. Give us just kind of the 1 minute background on your media career before we get to the big lesson.
Cool. So in the early 70s, I fell in love with movies, The Godfather, American Graffiti. I thought I wanted to make movies, and went off to Temple University in Philadelphia. Found out pretty quickly that wasn't exactly where I'd be. Movies are a painstaking business, and so I moved into the media business. Eventually, wanted to work in television, and then I was given an internship at an all news radio station, and I fell in love with the radio business and just had a ball doing it. I spent most of my career working in all news radio in Philly, and then found an opportunity in New York. And moved to New York. My girlfriend had moved to medical school. I headed for New York. Things didn't last in that direction, but I had a ball in New York for 4 years, and then was working for Westinghouse Broadcasting, a wonderful broadcasting company. And the word broadcasting is important to me. And Westinghouse moved people across the country. It was back in the days when people moved through up the career ladder by moving. So eventually, it was suggested I needed to go to Pittsburgh to sell. Worked at the legendary KDKA. Spent a year in Phoenix as a sales manager. On our honeymoon, married the incredible Dish, Tracy Homburg, who could sell better than me. She was another seller at KDKA. On our honeymoon, called us and said, "You're moving back to New York." Went back to New York and became the head of sales for 1010 Wins, an all news radio station in Detroit, the all news radio station in Detroit. We're still the group still talks. My buddies at 1010 Wins, remarkable point in my career. Then we got to the failure. For two years, I ran a small market radio company. We're going to talk a lot about that. After that failure, for 4 years, ran a traffic, news, weather, sports company, basically traffic reports for radio stations, 60 station network in New York. And then eventually, when Westinghouse bought CBS, they said, "Why don't you come back? Come back to we won was part of it. Westinghouse had bought CBS, and they competed against CBS, and they said, why don't you go to Pittsburgh? That's where you met Tracy, and her family's from Western Pennsylvania." At the last minute, I'm on the Garden State Parkway on a cell phone, a big box phone plugged into the lighter. And the hiring manager calls and he says, "We think we have a better idea, Detroit." And I'd been to Detroit once in my life, but I instantly knew the number 2 station, the all news station, had always been the good number 2 to the great WJR. So I was invited to manage WWJ, and would be in competition. It was a legendary competition, but WWJ lost most of those years, and for lots of reasons, and great people. And so I said to the manager, "I'm going to take the job. Let me call you back." And I called home, and I said to the Dish, "We're moving to Detroit, babe." She burst into tears and she hung up. She said, "Tell them I'm going to Pittsburgh," and hung up. Her sister lives in Pittsburgh. Her roots are in Pittsburgh. So I went home and convinced her 25 years ago that we should move to Detroit. It was a wonderful opportunity. And I reminded her that Detroit is a very, very, you've heard me say, the most important, TMI, CIA, the most important city in America. I love Detroit. It was a good fit for me personality-wise. As you can imagine, Detroiters pretty candid, and I like being here. I really enjoy living in Detroit, and came here and just got very invested in the city. For 12 years, I ran the all news station, and part of Detroit's deal is Detroiters say, "So where'd you go to school?" And they mean high school. And that's a trick question. And if you say Southfield, they say, "So your parents probably moved out in '67." It's kind of this, what I call the Detroit forearm shiver. Hey, you're here. So tell me, and no, or you say, "Well, I moved here recently." "Why'd you move here?" Do you understand our town? And there is a part of Detroiters that said, "Do you understand who we are? Do you understand how we got here? Do you understand the entire scope of our city? Do you know our history? And I thought, well, I would literally say, I'm all in. What role should we play? Help me understand. So we started this cycle. I did Leadership Detroit and all, and I did some boards and stuff at the all news radio station, commercial station. I was trying to differentiate ourselves from the competition, which was a talk station. I used to say to our staff, news is important, talk is cheap. We need to feel really good. We are we own now news, now traffic, now weather, now sports. We own now in the most important city in America. Pretty good spot, right? So we started to invite, we built a new building. We had a conference room that looked out over the newsroom, and we started to invite the community in for lunches. And it could be an advertiser, but more likely it would be a community group or a leader. We had the president of Michigan State, the president of University of Michigan, a bunch of leaders. The joke was with, Amy, we don't know you well enough. You haven't been in for lunch. Do you like coffee or do you like bad turkey sandwiches? And so this was, and in our managers, we would get 4 or 5 managers would show up. The news director found that over time, he improved the city desk operation by knowing more people. He got invested in it, and we bring in a variety of managers, and you would learn a lot about folks. But the whole idea was get face to face, and that just pulled me further and further into being a very invested Detroiter. And so along the way, the opening occurred at Detroit Public Television, and I was very excited. Went home and told my wife, I think I want to do this, and she said, you're so cheap. You save 15% of everything you ever made. Go do it. And so that's how I ended up here.
You have such a heart for others, Rich, and a heart for your community. And everyone who knows you across the public media system knows how much you love Detroit. And that's just such a beautiful thing. But I'm going to jump in. It's time to talk about that dirty F word and failure. You've been this guy who's been driven, who has been successful from the minute you stepped out of college. And so tell me, how old were you when this big event happened in your life? And I'm just going to you and I talked beforehand, and you titled the chapter for this book, Unforced Errors. So first, because I'm not a sports people, and maybe others aren't as well, help us understand what unforced errors is, and then let's jump into that dirty F word failure.
I'm not a huge sports fan, but sports analogies are always helpful. An unforced error is when you pass the ball and didn't need to, and it's intercepted. It's 3rd and 2. You need 2 yards to get a first down, and you throw the ball and it's intercepted. Why did you throw? It was an unforced error. You took the shot you didn't need to take it. And so that idea of don't do more than you actually needed, or don't move too quickly, or don't outrun your blocking. Unforced errors are the kinds of things you didn't need to go that far, you did, and then you blow it. And so that's the essence of that.
How old were you? And where did you go? Set up what this failure was.
So taking one step back, I grew up in the back of a drugstore. My family has owned drugstores. We still own, I'm not involved at all anymore, but we still own 4 drugstores in New Jersey. The entire Boyd family, the Boyds and the Homburgs. My grandfather started a drugstore. My uncle ran it. My mother owned a children's clothing store next to the drugstore, right next to it. And so we were retailers, and we were business owners. And so there was always a part of me, do I want to own my own business? And when I got into the radio business, I started to think maybe owning radio stations, small market radio. And I was coming through my 20s, and it was just something I thought about a lot. And eventually I connected with a gentleman who owned 9 local radio stations spread across Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Ohio. And the idea of maybe I would step out of Westinghouse. I'd worked there for 9 years. I loved Westinghouse. At the same time, there was this other side of me. I didn't want it. It wasn't in a good way. It was like a fraternity. Everybody at Westinghouse knew everybody, and there was a career track. And first you're in sales, and then you're a local sales manager, or a national sales manager, and a general sales manager, and a general manager. There's a track there, and it wasn't that I rejected it. I just saw another track, and that track was to go off and potentially own my own business. It was always of interest, and what I didn't know, I didn't know, if you will. And so I'm the head of sales at the number 3 billing radio station in the country, in New York City, in the largest market in the country. And I'm kind of in a really good spot if I played my cards out, I probably would have ended up being a general manager in a smaller market, and then maybe come back and be the GM at Wins. People would suggest, maybe you could be president of the division at some point. So there was this wonderful track, but I saw the road less taken, if you will. Years later, public television was much the road less taken, but I saw another path, and I really was very intrigued by it. So eventually, at the age—
How old were you? You got to tell me how old you were at this time.
I was 31 years old, and I'd only ever basically worked for one organization. I was 31, and the guy who owned those 9 radio stations said, "Why don't you come run them?" And I said, yes. And when I went in to resign at Westinghouse, they're like, "What are you doing? You're on this incredible track. Why are you doing this?" I said, I want to go do this. And so keep in mind, I was the head of sales for the radio station. I had never run a radio station. I had never done, I did my revenue budgets, but I had never done full budgets. There were all kinds of things I didn't know, but I thought I knew enough. And so I'm 31 years old. September of 91, I go off to run this all news radio. September of 89. I go off to run the radio station, and just got flummoxed, got killed. As they say, I didn't know what I didn't know. And I'm this energetic guy, and I come in and we're going to drive sales, and I've got stations in Erie, Parkersburg, Wheeling, West Virginia, Marion, Ohio, and State College, Pennsylvania. 9 stations spread across 5 cities that are all a good 2 hours plus from each other. And I'm used to having a team, and I'm used to having systems, and I'm used to having, you don't think what you don't know, you don't know what you don't know. I'm used to having a very strong finance operation. I took for granted some things. And again, I'd never run a business, but I always thought I wanted to. And so I went to work running these stations. And from day one, I was somewhat flummoxed. And, things that you're used to having when you work for one company, or certainly for a big company, weren't there. And I was HR systems and how you manage people, or job descriptions, or just basics of finance and budgeting, and management and leadership. There were basically these stations were run by my predecessors had done a very good job, but they were running a small business, and they knew as much about how to spend money as how to gather dollars. They knew as much about how to run businesses, and the legal, the operational stuff, how you run the joint, if you will. I didn't know a lot about it. And keep in mind, when you're in New York City and you're running an all news radio station, you've got a staff of 20 salespeople who are professionals, and they're making a good buck, and they're in this very, very important city. In a small town, you're hiring people who've never been in the radio business before. And this isn't a career for them, this is a job. And so the culture, everything about it was different. And what you realize is there aren't, like, in major markets in commercial media, there was a market for jobs. There were a lot of people who wanted to work at your place. You're trying to bring people in a small market, really tiny markets, who've never been in the radio business, and for them, this is just a job, and this isn't a career, and you're not paying them a lot of dough. It's a very, very different culture. And so, can I sell? Yeah, I could always sell pretty well. Did I know how to manage people that weren't driven by a career and weren't sales types? How to manage programmers, how to manage talent? I didn't know anything. And so I kind of lucked my way into a job and spent 2 years doing it, and simply got fired. And it was an incredible moment. The truth is that I learned a lot. There's things I learned working for Burbank Broadcasting that to this day I use, but I also learned a lot about myself, and that was probably as important as anything.
So let's go down those 2 paths. Let's talk about what you learned about yourself, and then I want to get into what you learned about leadership from that failure.
Sure. Well, I don't wear it on my sleeve, but the truth is I'm about as ADD, and I mean technically ADD, as anybody you'd ever meet. I have a very particular style. You hear my, my sense of energy and enthusiasm and my direction. Um, so a friend of ours, when this happened, a friend of ours suggested, before people had coaches and all, the whole world that we live in today is much more sophisticated. A friend of mine said, why don't you talk to this guy, Jack Ginter, and take the Ginter test? It was a personality profile test. Think Enneagrams, think Myers-Briggs and all the rest. And she said, I think he could help you. And so it's an adjective checkoff test. And so I take this test. On one side of the paper is how you see yourself. On the other side of the paper is how others see you. And this guy calls and he says, Rich, um, under the right circumstances, you're unemployable. Let's talk. That was a moment. That was a huge moment. And my wife was so worried about me. She's so wonderful. But he said, you need to really understand we are all unique. He says, but you're very unique. He says, do you realize that if you talk for 8 hours, you gain energy? You're in the very small percentage of folks who could talk for 8 hours, and you, at the end of 8 hours, you want to talk for 4 more. That you yakking it, folks, you gain energy from that. Do you understand? Most people are exhausted, and most people want to be done, right? The flip side is when you try to act like an accountant, after 4 hours, you want to take a nap. He says, you have to understand, we're all unique. But he said, but you're particularly unique. And he said, you need to understand who you are and how you work. And you need to put yourself in the right positions. At one point, someone said to me, and this was, I'll never forget it. Years later, when I turned 50, believe it or not, I hired another life coach, a wonderful woman, and she did a full 360. And she said 2 things to me. Again, you have to understand yourself, and I'm still learning, that is for sure. But she said 2 things to me that I'll absolutely never forget. The first thing is, she said, do you realize how unique your life is? Tracy and I have been married for 35 years. We have one child, the amazing Nicholas Homburg. She says, you get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and you leave the house and you get coffee, and you don't have any worries, any concerns. You are a free to run the countryside person until about 11:45, when you're on your way to lunch and you call your wife to check in. And when you call her, she's happy and she's got time to talk. And she says, you're not worried about money. You're not, just the way our life worked. Tracy lost both parents rather early. My dad died when I was 14. My mother moved to New Orleans and she was totally taken care of by my sisters. We were very involved, but the point is, you're not taking care of an ailing mother or an ailing child. She says, do you realize that there are people that would love to run as fast as you do, but they've got other issues in their life? Maybe this isn't the center of their life. Maybe they're taking care of an ailing parent. Maybe they're going through a tough time in their relationship. Maybe they have a child with a challenge. Maybe they just are different. And so she says, understand that you have to give people room to move at their speed or from their point of view. And the other thing is a little more funny. She says, do you realize that there are meetings that you need to set up that you need to not attend? That's kind of striking. She says, Rich, the quiet people in the room, when you walk in, they go, oh, great, Bozo's here. I can just quietly take notes. And you think about that sort of, you have this image in your head. I need to walk in. I need to set the standard for the meeting. I need to run the whole meeting. She says, why don't you walk in and say, folks, thanks, come together. Let me give you an assignment, or maybe have someone else give the assignment, and make sure the meeting happens if the meeting needs to happen. But go in at the end and listen. And she says, I know this will be hard for you, but kind of, and maybe it's old school, maybe younger folks who would watch this would say that the world has changed, but there was a sense where I came from of course you walk in and you set up the meeting and then you interrogate people or whatever. Sometimes when I walk into meetings these days, I put on the top of the piece of paper, BTLS, be the last to speak. And it's because it's really hard for me.
I'm just going to say, how hard is that, Rich, to be the last to speak? I mean, I understand that. I feel that too.
It's hard enough that I have to write it down, if you will. It's hard enough. We've all been with Tracy and me, and with Nick. We both coach each other. He's 27 years old. He's doing quite well. We need to stop always giving him advice. So, so the phrase between us is, "I'll bet you'll figure that out." Hey, bud, how are you? Boom, boom, boom. This happened. I'll bet you'll figure that out. And it's sort of a rock. You know, those phrases that kind of ground you. If you call my wife right now and say, "What does that mean?" What that means is, give it a breath. I'll bet you'll figure that out, Bubs. I love you, kid. You're gonna figure this out. And he might circle back and say, "No, I really want your advice." But it's the same way. It is hard for someone like me. I don't know about you, Amy, but it is hard when you're the leader. You think you're always supposed to lead, and it's so hard to say, "No, actually, you need to listen, and you need to double down on the listening and that practice." And so, that was very important. And
That's
and the
huge,
speed
Rich.
thing is, what's that?
That's huge. I'm with you 1,000%. There are moments where, because leaders lead so much, it doesn't allow our so-called followers to rise to their leadership positions. And I'm always trying to help empower my team. It's like, no, you don't have to ask me. Lead that section. I have faith in you. I believe in you. But they often, a strong leader in the room, they want to be like, well, what do you think? I'm like, well, what do you
Right.
think? To turn that question back to them.
Can I give you one example of someone we both know?
Please.
Paula Kerger, the PBS CEO. I have seen her. I remember one particularly pointed meeting, room full of general managers. I've joked she's the Zen master. They're fighting. Everybody's up in arms about an issue. It had to do with whether or not PBS needed to hire a consultant and issues, and it was amazing. Everybody spoke. There were probably 30, 40 people in the room, and even some of the PBS headquarters types spoke. And then the room quieted, and Paula said, she took the microphone, and she has this ability. Okay, let me bring this all together. And she says it, and all these people, these knuckleheads like me that are, second guessing, and I'll tell you, they all go, uh-huh, oh. And she says, here's what we're going to do. And she walked the room through. I'll never forget the moment. It was a conference room in the DC area, and it was around a technical issue and needs. But Paula had this ability. She had listened to the whole thing, and then her command was Zen. Her command was what Yoda, if you will. Okay, here's what we're going to do, and literally the whole. Oh, okay, and obviously but I've seen, I was on the PBS board for 2 terms. That ability to just wait a beat, in her case, it might be hours, but wait a beat and let it go. Tell me more, keep going. I've thought about that. It respects the board. It respects the audience. At some point, we've all got to do our job, and you need to make decisions. But that, I've seen it in her, and I kid her about it because you talk about unforced errors. She does not. You don't see a lot of unforced errors there. Why? Because she has that kind of discipline.
That's a great story, Rich. Now talk to us a little about the second issue. What you learned about leadership from your big failure, that dirty F word.
That sometimes you don't know what you don't know, and if you grew up, if your enthusiasm and energy and ability to sell drove you to a certain point, at some point the business changes, and that's not the being able to sell is always important, but the needs and the circumstance change. And if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And if that's your go-to thing, I always motivate people and I always know how to sell them, right? And at some point, and I think we're seeing this a lot in the media business, people forget that the commercial media business was more a franchise. We always convinced ourselves we were very entrepreneurial. We were running a franchise. All news is the McDonald's of radio. Classic rock is Burger King, right? And there was a way you played that out. And we never knew what we didn't know. And that was, we were the only people in town in that business. We had a license that no one else could take. We had a built-in audience. There was a business there, just like a McDonald's on a corner. If you measure the number of people who come past the McDonald's, you can get a pretty good sense of how many people are going to be there. And so recognizing you don't know what you don't know, and that the strengths you have in one generation of a business or one size and shape of a business may not be the strengths you need in the next business. And so just if you're always the hammer, everything looks like a nail, you go into the next business, that's not how this business runs. And I think for us right now in the media business, things that used to work don't work so well anymore. Skills that used to work, you hear me talk about broadcasters, but we were basically in a business. We put programs on the air. You sit at home and watch. I remember when Rainey Aronson took over Frontline. I think she brought a whole new sense of this isn't just 1 hour big docs produced over a long period of time that are delivered to you. You see in Rainey that sense of we're going to own issues and we're going to do it incrementally and we're going to keep building. That's not where the system was 25 years ago. The changes in how people consume media, we went from think history. When I started, there were television stations as licenses, and then along came cable, and then along came cable networks. But it was still, we went from like a 7-station environment to a 50-channel environment to a 300-channel environment. But it was still, we send you programs, you sit at home and watch. Today, we're in an environment that first of all, the consumer owns it. No, we're in charge there, knucklehead, right? The consumer will tell you what they want. And we're in an environment where you're going to play that show out incrementally on all kinds of platforms and offered in whatever ways the consumer wants it. And today, I think for us, and my feelings about sort of community engagement, there's also a sense in our communities of you will hear my voice. I will be part of this discussion. Don't tell my story without talking to me. And so that the idea of we're the big television station sending you programs, we know that's changed, but I think knowing that the skills that are needed today and the approach needed today dramatically different. And that's been a wonderful learning lesson for me.
Rich, I love your humility. I love your passion. And I wish everyone watching and listening, and when they read the book, had a chance to spend time with you, because you're really a special and amazing human being. And I'm really grateful for your time. We're out of time, though. I just want to wrap it up. If you wanted someone to take away one thing from this conversation, what would that one big dirty F word lesson be?
Know yourself and be in love with who you really are. Truly know yourself and love that person.
With all our flaws and boo-boos and warts.
Yep.
We all have it. Rich Homburg, President and CEO of Detroit Public Television. We love you. We appreciate you sharing that dirty F word. 31 is in your rearview mirror now, and that failure set you up for so much success. And it's fun to watch you in the business.
Same here. It's a pleasure to work with you and to watch you as well. Thanks, Amy.